My name is Kim Tran, Head of Marketing here at Gimmal. I see some familiar names already in our live attendance, and welcome back, and welcome to new faces and names. We will be sharing this recording after today's live webinar. There was a question around certificate and certification, and today's webinar, while educational, will not provide any certificate or continuing education credit. And so feel free to review the recording when we send it out. But otherwise, we are also here to assist you after today's webinar via the NNIT team, which I will introduce in a short few moments, as well as the Gimmal team here. So without further ado, welcome to today's webinar, Are You Audit Ready? A guide for records management within life sciences. So quick overview of the agenda. What is records management, benefits, and challenges? Some of you all are actually not records managers. I see a few different varieties of titles, roles, and we want to make sure that we address all of you and how your role plays into records management, and specifically within the life sciences. Preparing organizations for records management implementation. We will go over that today as well. As you all know, having a great technology solution is only part of the equation. If no one understands the need for it or even how to use it, you may not be as successful as you would like. And then, of course, the importance of records management within life sciences, risk of non-compliance. If you are not within, these teams, making folks understand the repercussions as well as the opportunities is also very important. And then we will then close it out with how to GXP validate the records management tool from our partners here at NNIT, and then live Q&A and staying connected. And so, as I mentioned at the top of the hour, in case you missed it, feel free to chat us live in the chat. But if you have any questions, we encourage you to use the Q&A feature. This will ensure that folks see your question and we also address it as well live at the end of today's webinar. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce you to our speakers really quickly with our NNIT partners, Michael and Ole, and then Kurt and Frank on our Gimmal team. And so Michael, if you could just give a quick introduction and then we'll pass it on popcorn style.
Yes, thank you very much, Kim, and I'm looking forward to actually tell you a little bit about the way that we are actually doing. My name is Michael Jensen, and I'm a lead auditor, and I'm a software matter expert. I've been in this business for 22 years, and before that I was actually spending 15 years for European space agencies. We're not going out to space today. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Ole.
Thanks, Michael. That's good. We keep our feet on the ground. My name is Ole Berndt. I've been with NNIT for a little more than 2 decades, specializing in computer systems validation, which is also a topic today, and in particular processes, approaches where you can remain compliant and also validate in a smart and efficient way. Topics that we will cover later. Yeah, thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Excited to have you. Kurt.
Yep, I'm Kurt Teese, Vice President of Gimmal Solutions. So work closely with our customers, our partners, and have a long history in the information and records management space, and also within the life science industry.
Thank you, Kurt. And rounding out today's speakers, last but never least, Frank.
Good morning and afternoon to everybody. My name is Frank Adamo. I run Gimmal's project management office and I manage strategic projects. Been with Gimmal for about 15 years and in the enterprise content and records management industry for a little over 30 years. And I was a former ARMOR chapter president in a past life too. Look forward to giving you some information. Thank you.
Thank you all. We are in good company today. For those who are new to Gimmal, we are Information Governance Simplified. And so we are the market's only end-to-end information governance solution, everything from physical and electronic records to data governance and sensitive data discovery. NNIT is our latest partnership with our esteemed guests today, Ole and Michael, and they are also a provider of IT solutions and advisory services specifically to life sciences clients and organizations internationally and worldwide. And so I am excited to welcome all four of you today, and we'll now pass it on to Kurt.
Terrific. Thanks, Kim. So we're excited to present and speak together. Our focus, as Kim has laid out, is records management within the context of life sciences. And with that, there are particular ways that life science organizations manage their information. And we have worked alongside NNIT with these projects, and what we're sharing is the combination of software, services, validation that are specific to the GXP life science requirements. So let me first set the stage. When we talk about records management and information governance, so the context is the management of the life cycle of the information. So within the life science industry, where you're doing research and development, you're doing manufacturing, you're doing distribution of highly sensitive information, there are particular requirements for that process, the document control, the traceability, and the auditing. So the general records management principles that you have to have policies around your records. What is a record? How long do you keep it? Knowing what you have. So where is your inventory? Where are the official records, both physical and electronic? How are they classified for retrieval? And how do you apply that policy for retention and disposition? And within that, managing the actual process. So how does information move through the organization? So I've used the IG reference model as a good framework. And in the center, we're going through that life cycle of creating, using, protecting, and we're really focused on when you retain and lock down those records and then manage their life cycle through to disposition, where they have gone through their process, and now you have to have those records auditable and traceable within your information life cycle. So part of that is having a governance solution that manages that and doing it within a GXP process, and also one that we're going to speak about today that is validated. So that's really critical. So on the next slide, let's drill into that a little bit. So within life sciences, again, as I referenced, you're doing research and development, you're doing manufacturing, and this is the creation of drugs, scientific solutions that are highly regulated, as you can imagine. So the type of records are very particular within this industry, all related to the type of business that is being managed. Also, as customers, these tend to be global organizations. So together with NNIT, we work with some of the leading drug makers, manufacturers in the world. So life sciences, biopharma, pharmaceutical. And the type of records indicated here are part of that document control, quality control process within their business. So they're both highly regulated, highly, they are asset records within the organization. They have particular value, and knowing what state they're in and the traceability is critical. So on the next slide, let's now talk a little bit about how we actually go about doing that. So this is a nice visual of how we implement the solution. So we're providing an automated process using both physical and electronic records, and touching upon the systems that are in use as the systems of record in the organization. So increasingly, organizations are using SharePoint, Purview, M365 as a platform. So that is part of the ecosystem of solutions. And when we're working with these systems on the Gimmal side, our focus is to apply the policy. So the classification, the retention, and then run the process for the saving and the collection and the disposition of those records. So you know the official record, you have the traceability within the process, and it's part of your validated GXP process to manage that information. We also manage the physical records. So this is an industry that has been highly regulated and has had particular processes. So it's going through that digital transformation process, but it still has information that is in a physical format. It's in document control rooms, it's in archives, it's in offsite storage, and those need to be managed within this overall information framework. So that's something that our software accommodates and provides. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. In the electronic side, also, we are not replacing systems. We are augmenting and using connectors to apply the policy to those systems. So we are extending and providing capability for the information governance lifecycle management within that electronic ecosystem. And Frank will talk a little bit about the use case and how we do that. So in the next slide, let me touch a little bit more about the physical records, which are part of this process. And the way that Gimmal uses our software to apply the records process equally across physical and electronic records. So the file plan, the classification, while the actual management of the records is different because they're in different formats. So the way that you manage electronic records is very different, as you can see in the visual, from the physical records boxes that have an operational component that the software manages. So we're managing the barcoding, the tracking, the space management of their storage, their location. We also integrate to offsite vendors. So Gimmal is a very mature product in how it manages the physical records along with the electronic records as well. So on the next slide, let's talk a little bit about the processes contained within that. So we're managing the life cycle of the record. And again, not so much the creation collaboration. These are the official records that we're managing their life cycle and how they're now being used within the organization. On the electronic side, as I mentioned, we're doing that with in-place records management. So we're not replacing existing repositories or system of records. We're providing capability on top of that. So legal holds, auditing, reporting, applying the classification, the file plan, and most importantly, running the defensible disposition. So how do you destroy and delete or archive those records according to your policies and processes? So the system is automating that entire workflow and process. So on the next slide, let's talk a little bit about the use case. So with NNIT and Gimmal, you have the software that is applying your GXP quality control process to your records and information. So incorporating things like the CFR Part 11 requirements, the specific GXP quality requirements and guidelines, and doing this within a validated process. So our partners at NNIT take the software and then add the services to run the scripts, the tests, and do this in a validated certified process. So they're going to talk a little bit more about that when I turn it over to them. On the next slide, let's talk a little bit about an example. So I'm going to ask Frank to speak a little bit about what we have done with some of our global life science customers.
Thanks, Kurt. So this slide here is kind of generic, but I'll tell you a little bit about a specific use case. Gimmal and NNIT teamed up on a large project for a global life science organization. Their business challenges were they had slow and costly GXP file shares. Their physical application was out of support, and they needed a global and scalable platform for archiving. So we installed our Gimmal Records product for electronic records and our Gimmal Physical product for hard copy files and wet sample storage. During the installation process, we had to configure it specifically for them and train them. So we configured our Physical Records product to replace a legacy application by migrating just under 10 million records from that legacy application, and then configured it so that it met their specific use case. We configured our electronic records product, and then we're beginning the rollout process to the business that will manage a life cycle of tens of millions of records in M365. And it'll manage those from the collaboration stage to the archival and disposition stage. In addition, we configured some flows to improve the user experience in M365. It's not quite intuitive. And we automated site templates and provisionings to assure that it meets the GXP record standards. NNIT did the validation. In fact, Michael, my fellow speaker, led that effort with skill and tenacity. And even so, we're still friends. Next slide, please. And then back to you, Kurt.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Frank. And I think it's important to note that what we're speaking about is records management, information governance, and it is a very specific use case within the life science industry because of the types of records, the quality process, and the requirements of these records, as you can imagine. So it's highly regulated. It is also, as Frank is speaking, the volume of records. So within the the scope of our customers, these are global. There are a lot of users of the system. There is a lot of volume in terms of the inventory and the records that are being managed. They also are extremely sensitive. So the information security requirements, the sensitivity of the information, the audit requirements, whether it's with the FDA, ISO, are very intensive. So it's really, I would say, a very robust records management, information governance use case. And from that, the benefits of a purpose-built solution and the ability to make your system audit ready and have the experience in that validation process that NNIT will provide is critical. So it lends itself in cost savings. So not only compliance, efficiency, the ability to access that information, but most importantly, the alternative. So you need to manage this information. If you're not doing it with these tools, these services, we have found that what it takes to get the same results simply costs more. So there's a very tangible cost savings that is being provided. It also translates to ease of use, where you have a process. Information governance is not the first priority. Records management of people that have other jobs, but also have this responsibility to archive and maintain these records. So the fact that the system is intuitive, it's easy to use, translates into not only that efficiency, but the accuracy of the information and the ability to do that at scale. So that's really critical. And on the next slide, I'd like to talk about why now. So this has been a requirement within this industry for many years. I mentioned the heritage of the physical records that have been part of this process. But in today's environment, as companies are going to further automation, digital transformation, they're going to large-scale cloud systems. They're incorporating more and more of the M365 SharePoint capabilities into their environments. So they're dealing with a lot of change management on the technology side. addressing legacy platforms and their migration while maintaining the integrity of that data, and doing all of this within a highly compliant, regulated industry with audit, regulatory requirements, data privacy, all of those things. So it really creates kind of the perfect storm of requirements and the use for the system. So on the next slide, we're going to hear from our partners at NNIT. So how do they then work with customers to put this into action and provide a audit-ready system?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for the very great introduction and all the details. We will also now look a little more, also generally speaking, at some aspects, important aspects of implementing the records management system. As illustrated here, and I admit it's a quite simplified illustration, but you may be standing at a crossroads when you have to decide in which direction you want to go and in which direction you need to go when you are about to embark on plan for implementation of a records management system. Possibly you are in the situation where you already have some sort of records management system in place, and you are about to decide on the next steps, possibly going to a digital solution. Different companies are in different situations, but in our opinion, they all have one thing in common, that is they need to plan very carefully and prepare the organization very carefully for the implementation. And that brings us to the important topic of organizational change management. We will also talk about afterwards about the validation, and in particular in our opinion, the smart and efficient ways of validating a record management system. Organizational change management, this is a key activity, and we have mentioned here a couple of numerous aspects that are important, and I will summarize them. I would say stakeholder assessment is a key activity, one of the first activities that should be taken care of. So what are the stakeholders in the organization? Which stakeholders have what interest in the future use of that change that is coming? They probably all have different opinions and different stakes in the change that needs to be addressed. It's very important to make the organization aware of the nature of the change, explain clearly what it involves. There could also be business drivers in the organization related to why it is happening. So not only the what, but also why are we doing this change? Why are we considering implementing a new records management system? The timing, why are we doing it now, is also a natural question. And there can also be risks that needs to be addressed. The risks of doing this change that is being considered, but also the risks of not doing it. And if we follow on to the next slide, please, then we will see that adaptation also of the quality management system is an important aspect. Changing the records management system, that's, I think we could agree, that does not only involve possibly a new mindset, but there can also be doubts about what is the impact on our existing processes, our existing procedures. The need to anticipate resistance is, cannot be emphasized too much. And one way of drawing lessons early on, it can be to implement on a smaller scale, to do a pilot project, draw your lessons from that, and then afterwards you can plan for a fully fledged implementation. Perhaps this all sounds too theoretic, but in my opinion, in practice, it makes perfect sense. And we have a few more considerations that we will look at on the next slide. That is around the drivers for the records management transformation. Again, there are different stakeholders we have mentioned before that should be involved. Management, obviously the record management function, the quality department, could also be a particular project that have a particular interest in the implementation. You need to take a holistic view on such an important change. Understand who has a stake in what, and it's all about people. It's all about adapting the organization to the future change. Let's go to the next slide, where we have a few more inputs regarding resistance. Did I mention resistance? Yes, that is of course very important, and it's also related to the possibility of uncertainty. The moment that you talk about changing something, implementing a new system, it will create uncertainty. I think that is quite common, and that of course also relates to that new knowledge, new information needs to be shared. So for example, when you are implementing a new records management system, yeah, there will typically be resistance in the organization related to the new ways of working that are being proposed. What are the consequences for my role today and my future role? Everything here is about planning, carefully planning, and considering these aspects. Of course, there's just examples. There are possibly more aspects, but these are the main ones. We talked earlier about the records management in a life science perspective, and that is in particular very important because there are specific regulatory requirements and expectations to how you deal with records in life sciences. And we have said here, why is it important? Maybe even a question before that is it important? Well, yes, it is very important. And why it is important, there are several good reasons for that. One of the main criteria related to why it is important is the compliance criteria. It's about having access to your records. It's about the records being accurate. It's about the records being complete. And it's about the ability to search for records. These are main criteria in relation to compliance. And we will also afterwards look at the risks of non-compliance. Another important criteria is the need for identifying and classifying records. We mentioned that earlier also, and in particular in life science, that is a key aspect. The retention rates for how long you need to retain your records, that needs to be defined. All this is also coming back to the title of this webinar. It's about being audit ready. And if you have these things in control, in our opinion, then you are well on the way to have audit readiness under control. The risks, and obviously there are a number of risks of being non-compliant. Non-compliance may be discovered during audits or inspections. If you have inadequate records or you are not in control of your records, it can lead to findings. We could also imagine that could lead to financial penalties or maybe even some legal action against the company. Lack of data integrity can also have compliance consequences. Records can be lost, partially or fully lost, and that could also lead to errors if you are using records for research on clinical trials. But it can also be records related to the validation of a system if you are keeping evidence from validation activities in a records management system, and you are unable to provide such records. That will also have compliance consequences. Overall, I would argue that non-compliance can also have an impact on the operation of the company, so the business continuity of a company in a worst case scenario. So all in all, yeah, records management, this is not only important, it is extremely important. How do you then get ready to implement and validate such a system? That is a question I have asked my very good colleague, Michael, and we will look at that in a moment. Yeah, we can just repeat here again the responsibilities. They are distributed across at least 4 main functions. So the compliance area, risk management, information governance, and the legal areas, they all have various their own individual responsibilities in relation to records management. I would not say we have kept the best for last, but I think the smart way about the validating a records management tool, that's a key topic of today.
Thank you, Ole. And I have a pleasure to actually going to tell you a little bit about how we are actually going to do the validation. In general, in NNIT, we are actually using digital validation due to it is smarter, it's much more efficient, and it's much more cost-effective for all our clients. The method and the tools that we are using is actually called TMLS, and that is based on the product Microsoft ALM, which is called Application Lifecycle Management Tool. On the next slide, I'm going to explain a little bit about the high-level validation approach. At the high-level validation approach that we are actually taking is that the validation approach is actually very simple. And what we're actually going to do, we are going to, in general, applying good industry risk practice according to the GAMP5, which is both very efficient and is actually compliant. When we're doing that, we are also leveraging with the vendors' activities and documentation, which is in line with GAMP5, and we are actually implementing critical thinking, the mindset of CSA, where we're actually trying to achieve less is more. When you are including the vendor's documentation, that means we are actually doing less. At the same time, we're using the digital validation lifecycle management tool to plan, document, and execute all the validation activities. So in more details, what we actually are doing is that we will work with pre-approved requirement, test plans, protocol, and report based on the standard package. And the more standard it is, the better it is for you, dear client out there, because the less customization we do, it will also be cheaper. So we will make an extract from the TMLS, which will list all the Gimmal standard product in what we call a compliance matrix. And this compliance matrix will actually show which requirements and which tests are actually planned and already pre-approved. So it means if the client is coming along, we use the compliance matrix as input for the client to actually see if we can comply with the client's requirements. But typically, there's something extra needed to cover some specific needs where we are going from software category 3 to software category 4 and 5. Meaning that if we are going to software category 4, that means that there'll be some customization stuff, or 5, that means that we are actually going to do more new software. This validation approach at the same time also gives the benefit for the client if the client already have a validation tool itself. That means we can actually extract the data electronically and provide it as export. If not, if the client don't have that tool, it is possible for us to actually extract all the files still digital as PDF files. And on the next slide, I'm actually going to explain a little bit about how we're going to use the compliance matrix. If you can see the slide, if you can see the figure on the right left-hand corner. And the way what we were actually doing is that in our terminology, the compliance matrix is the key to success. So we are using an extract from TMLS as input to the client regarding what is actually scope for the record management system. And what you see in the box in the left is there's 4 examples. And the first 2 is actually where the clients have some number of requirements and we fully comply with that. So it means it's category 3 and the only thing we're actually doing, we'll do a PQ. That's it. So that would be the cheapest and the easiest way of actually doing it. Then you see requirement number 3. The requirement number 3, the customer has put in something and we are looking at it and saying, it is possible, we are still in compliance. However, we need to do some configuration, which means, if you look in the comments field, which means that we're doing configuration, we have to do a design review, we probably have to look at the risk impact and see if there's anything wrong with that. And then we will actually have to do some functional tests. The 4th example, or the 3rd example, is that we are in a situation where the client is asking something and it's a category 5. That means we actually need to modify the code to actually fulfill the requirement. So we are stating it's partly compliant due to the fact that we actually have to write new code. We do have to do code review and we have to do the functional test. Then you see there's some errors actually going into the risk assessment. That means when we have done the assessment together with the client, we can also easily identify which new risk points have actually been identified. And these risk points will be classified and saying, okay, that means the following need to be mitigated to actually ensure that the risk will have no impact. The last example you see is that the client is actually requesting something and the product cannot comply with that. So it means here in this case, we're saying non-complying, not possible, it's not doable. At the next slide, we're actually going to talk a little bit about related to the requirement. So here we are in a situation that the overall approach is that and the way you should read it is that, number 1, we have actually received a compliance matrix based on the meeting with the clients and together we're saying, okay, this is what is the scope, the statement of work for this task. So the first thing we're going to do, we are actually going to update TMLS. Remember I told you in TMLS, those are all the standard requirements. Now there's actually a lift up some modification. We are changing the TMLS, so TMLS is actually adapting the reality. At the same time, we're also providing the clients access to our system, so the clients actually have a viewer access so they can see what is happening. We are doing the design and the development and the verification of all these items that actually had category 4 and 5. And in there, we already have identified some quality gates, acceptance criteria for all those things. When we are in a situation that now we are ready, so it means then we're doing the whole validation and of everything what we have actually stated. And please note that when we're actually getting in this situation, that one of the first things we actually have to do in the validation is we need to do a unit test. We also need to establish a configuration item list. We need to do the installation. We also need to do the deployment. And this is focused on all the new modified requirement and where the risk control points have been identified and will be performed in an end-to-end test. All standard requirements which have not been changed will only be subject to PQ and PV where we are using Gimmal's documentation as evidence. And now when we're talking about documentation, on the next slides, I'll also give you an example of which kind of documentation that will be part of our package. We will produce a product quality plan where the the compliance matrix are input. We will produce a validation plan where we'll actually determine the GXP terminology and apply the frameworks and all that stuff. what you see here, the user requirement, functional requirement, design specification, and configuration, all these items are actually subject to TMLS. They're inside TMLS that can easily be taken out. At the same time, TMLS can also provide you a traceability report, which is lifecycle. So it means at the same time, we can also use the tool to see the progress, what is happening. It's actually providing a lot of graphs and things like that. At the same time, when we're doing the validation, we will be working with scripted and unscripted for testing and actually have focus on the risk that we have identified. When we're finished with all that stuff, we will produce a product quality report. We will produce a validation report, including the release for production. You can do it whenever you wish, a traceability report, and there will be user manuals and operation manuals. Standard operation procedure is, of course, the client's documents, but we will guide and help you and assist you when required. That's all from me, and I will leave it over to Kim.
Thank you so much, Michael, and to all of our speakers. And just to summarize, there was a lot of content today, especially for folks who are not in life sciences and or aren't records managers. And so key takeaways, and again, as I shared, we will be sending out the recording. But first step, you want an auditable, traceable, and more importantly, repeatable process. And that can only be achieved with a technology solution that can scale. We are humans, but we can't do it all, especially within global organizations. So auditable and repeatable, you can identify what records to keep, where they are, and more importantly, access them quickly and accurately. Then we went into NNIT's portion, especially for Ole, talking about preparing and communicating your organization. We're humans, we may be averse to change, legacy systems, market changes, organizational culture within your immediate teams, your bosses, your stakeholders, and really thinking through what you need to do to get ahead. And that starts with getting buy-in from your organization. And then finally, GXP capable and compliant. It takes a whole village, it takes a whole organization, and accelerated implementation and validation with experienced, trusted advisors means that you are smoothing out the process up front. You are not doing it alone, but you are also making sure that you are being accurate, you have help along the way, and you are not losing any money, but also inefficiencies, and more importantly, making sure that you are staying compliant. We can't be experts at everything, and thankfully we had some great experts on today's call. So thank you again to all of our speakers. We are now going into Q&A, and I wanted to address here and remind folks, if you have a question, please use the Q&A function and feature here, or if you prefer the chat, that's okay too. So we do have a question we addressed at the top of the hour. Today's webinar, while educational in nature, will not provide any certification or continuing credits. We also had a question around retention schedules globally and locally. Okay, so I think anyone really on the speaker panel today can address this. But
yeah,
the question,
Kim, that's one that is, as you said, that is very common within the life science industry. As I mentioned, these are tend to be global organizations, so they have jurisdictions that go in all the areas where they manufacture, they operate, and so it tends to be quite complex as a result. How to manage those schedules, do it at scale, and meet all of those particular requirements. You also have use cases where you may have a company that is in Europe that is developing and manufacturing, but their pharmaceuticals are sold and distributed in the United States. So they're subject to all the FDA rules and regulations. So they tend to have multiple jurisdictions that need to be managed in the retention requirements, also regulations that span across all the global agencies.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Kurt.
Kirk, I can add to that. So Kirk's right. It could be complex. It's not impossible. So there's good news and there's inconvenient news. Good news, the software can handle it. The inconvenient news is it takes a little bit of work to configure it and make sure that it complies with all of the regulations and needs of the organization. So, it may take a few days to work through the process, but it's all doable.
Thank you, Frank. And Kurt, our next question revolves around stakeholder buy-in. So saying no to the status quo, changes change is always happening. What do you recommend in terms of initiation phase with stakeholders? So top, bottoms up, or top down is more efficient? Let me rephrase that question if I'm understanding correctly from the question here. It sounds like stakeholder buying and preparing the organization, and then we'll talk about communication plans. In your experience for the panel, is there an effective or more efficient approach in terms of initiating change management, whether you get buy-in from your manager, your immediate team, or maybe an executive level, for example? And if executive level, who are these folks that folks should be thinking about engaging early and consistently?
Sorry, I was muted. Seen from my perspective, I've actually been part of the project with a different tool where this also need to be implemented. And I think we did the mistake that we didn't go to the top. We actually did from bottom up. And we have to remember who's actually paying the bill. And the one who's paying the bill is probably the guy who's sitting on the top. So I actually think that what you should do, whatever you're doing, is actually creating a business case. And in this business case, you are actually trying to address many of the issues that he already talked about, and saying why is a benefit, why is a risk, and all that stuff, and why is that important that your organization need that. And then go to the top stakeholders, the top management who actually have the money, then present the case and saying this is actually what is needed. I think this is the best way. But then you can also do a small POC-up project where you actually do it isolated. And when that is done and you can actually prove towards the top management, we have actually implemented this, and you can actually save that amount of money, because in the end of the day, it's money talks.
Thank you, Michael.
I agree with that. I just want to shoot in a comment that maybe it's not always either or, but for sure I agree with the sponsor of the change needs to be addressed first. But I think the rest of our organization is just as important eventually. Yeah.
Thank you, Ole.
Not that it should be a discussion team here, but I also think it's if we do not get up to the top management, and the top management are actually saying this is what we want, then you can be in a situation, different department, and one department saying, no, I don't want this to be done in my department. So,
the top management is the key, of course, so it's a prerequisite.
Yeah, I think so.
And it's good we have this discussion. This is what makes the webinar dynamic.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I love sharing your practical experiences. As you said, Ole, all of these change management, preparing the organization, frameworks, things like that, in theory, there are processes mapped out, but in practice, people and humans, it gets a little complex. And so knowing these things ahead of time is really beneficial. And so thank you for sharing your insights and your industry experience there. So I don't see any other questions coming in. If folks want to chat or contact us or anything like that, I also wanted to share that this is just the first of webinar series and other content and thought leadership that we will be sharing in partnership with NNIT. And so please stay connected. We will also be, at least in the US here, we will be starting going to conferences and our spring industry events happening soon. And so first up at AIM, for those who will be at AIM, we will be hosting a customer appreciation dinner. And then quickly followed by pretty much weekly after that, we will be across the country, starting with InfoNext, ARMA Denver and ARMA Houston, as well as Laserfiche and ARMA Canada up north. And so we are excited to see you. I also noticed someone who dialed in from New Zealand. And so Kurt will actually be speaking at RIMPA later this fall in September. And so please stay updated at gimmal.com/events. We are also on LinkedIn as well. And so thank you again, everyone, for joining us live. We are so thankful that you made time today to join the team. Thank you, Ole and Michael from the NNIT team, as well as Kurt and Frank on our Gimmal side here. We will be sending out the recording. And but ahead of that, if you have any questions, if you didn't feel comfortable asking us live, that's okay too. We totally understand. And you can reach out to the Gimmal team at sales@gimmal.com or NNIT specifically at contact@NNIT. Thank you again, everyone, and we will see you around the block, around the world, and thank you again for joining us. Have a great day, rest of the week, wherever in the part of the world you are.